Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. I understand you can say hi in the chat, so please do so. I'm going to be talking through some slides, hopefully show you some videos that talk about what it is that's happening with migrants and undocumented people in the country. And hopefully there will be a little bit of time to do some, you can ask questions in the chat at the end. So I want to begin by acknowledging, of course, that we are that I'm currently speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe people here in Toronto, Ontario. And these are territories that have been taken care of for centuries by Indigenous land defenders. And for us, these are, Toronto is also host to many urban Indigenous people from around the country. Canada is built on the theft of Indigenous land and resources from people and from Indigenous people. And so for us as migrants and refugees, immigrants, and undocumented people, it's really essential that we are actually supporting our people to be with solidarity with Indigenous struggles for self-determination. So everything that I speak to you today is not just about rights of citizenship, rights that everybody else has, but actually about transforming the world into transforming society into what we really want it to be. So I want to just give you a brief analysis of who we are and what we do, right? So we are the cross-country alliance, the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, which is where I work as an Ontario-based coalition of migrant-led bodies, unions, faith-based groups, legal clinics, and allies. And we are also a member of the Migrant Rights Network. The Migrant Rights Network is a national body and has many members in British Columbia, including Sanctuary Health, the Coalition for Domestic Worker and Caregiver Rights, RAMA, Migrante BC, and more. And so, I urge all of you to find the local migrant justice organization in your community and connect with them, because we're actually building a national movement that's capable of fighting for rights and justice for all of us. So, we are experiencing a global crisis of inequality. And, we all know this, we all feel it. We know that the world that we're living in is not fair, it's not equal. Right now, we know that just 2,000 people have more, there are just 2,000 billionaires in the world, right? And those 2,000 people have more money than more than half the planet. That there's a very, 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 2,000 people, it's like, it's a small town, are controlling the most of the planet. And the rich are getting richer. In fact, during COVID-19, this slide I made was on November 5th, and it says that, the richest few in Canada have made $37 billion during COVID-19. And just yesterday, we received a new report that the number is actually $54 billion. And it's very important that, we've heard the word billionaire so much that we've started forgetting. We don't really understand what the scale is. So I just like to tell people this, right? So think about, okay, so what's the difference between a million and a billion, right? So 1 million 1 million minutes is 11 and a half days. Okay, so 1 million minutes is 11 and a half days. 1 billion minutes is 31 and a half years. Okay, there is a significant difference between those two. They are very different. And it's very important for us to understand that there are very few billionaires, and that's just a lot of money. Now, while the richer are getting richer, we're also seeing that the climate crisis, war, poverty is affecting people around the global south. So right now, for example, just on one question of climate, which is top of mind for many of us, Canadian corporations owe over $400 billion in climate debt. And what that means is that they owe the pollution that they've created in the global south. When I say global south, I mean not North America, everywhere outside of North America and Western Europe, basically the rest of the world, right? So if you look at this map, it's the places that are not green, and those are the places that are most at risk. This is where the majority of the world's planet lives. And so as the rich are getting richer, mostly they're getting richer in the places we live in, places like Canada and others. And we see these in our communities, but it has a global dimension. Now, as a result, people around the world are forced to move. So right now, if you took all of the migrants in the world, so these are migrants, refugees, and undocumented people, and you put them in a country, it would be the 4th largest country in the world. The world is on the move. People are moving. And by and large, when people are moving, they're not actually moving to North America or Europe. We have all of these photos or images of refugees or immigrants, maybe on little boats in the sea. But actually, most of the migration is happening south-south. So people are moving, to India, to Brazil, from the Philippines to the next state, to Singapore, to the Middle East. There's a lot of movement, but very few people are actually coming to the global north. And most of those people are moving because they don't have the ability to feed their families where they live. It is simple as that. There is no work, the climate is in a catastrophe, and you have to go somewhere else to feed your family. But when we talk about places like Canada, we have to understand that most migrants that are coming to Canada, the vast majority of people that are coming into the country are migrants. That is to say that they don't have permanent resident status. So every year, approximately 300,000 people come into the country with permanent resident status, and 750,000 people are coming into the country without permanent resident status. So if you look at this screen in front of you, as you can see, there is 1.6 million people in 2019 were in the country without permanent resident status. That is to say that people are coming here, they're working in farms, in fields, in factories, they're taking care of children, the sick, the elderly, they are international students in universities, they're refugee claimants. They're coming here on short-term permits, during which time they may work, they may study, but eventually they will be forced to leave the country. During this time, they don't have access to universal health care. Many are too scared to speak up against their bosses. And this has created a crisis, right? So if you build a society where 1.6 million people don't have full rights, how are we going to build a fair society, right? It's really important for us to understand that, if, for example, as a labor union, if the bosses could bring in a secondary workforce, and that workforce they could pay less, treat worse, and those people wouldn't speak up and complain. And if they did speak up and complain, the boss could just ship them on the next plane back home. What would that do to our union? Now, that is what Canada and its corporations are doing to migrants. As a result, today, 1 in 23 people in the country, 1 in 23 is a migrant without full immigration status and without full rights. So it's very important to understand this distinction between immigrant or permanent residents and everybody else, if that makes sense, right? So 1 in 23 is a massive number. And as you can see from the previous slide, this number is going up. Just in the last 4 years, it's gone up 0.6 million. This, see, in 2015, it was a million. In 2019, you can say it's over 1.6 million. So these numbers are growing as Canada shifts to more and more temporary work. This is essentially Canada is turned into a temp agency. To be clear, temporary migrants have been coming to the country for over half a century. But the expansion is continuing at an astronomical rate, and it's continuing. And this is particularly about denying rights to people. These are people who pay taxes but can't get full services. These are people who pay, much more in fees, in tuition fees, but can't get full rights. So at the same time, we have all noticed and learned during COVID-19 that migrant workers are essential, right? So in Ontario, where I'm currently in, the vast majority of people who grow food are migrant workers. The same in BC, it's the same in Quebec. And without those people, it would be very difficult for us to sustain our food sources and our food society. It is the same with care workers. In-home childcare is being provided by migrants. If you think about international students, those are at every campus in every town, you are seeing these new buildings pop up. Who's paying for them, right? So at the same time as we have seen that migrants are essential, these are the people who grow food, take care of our families, our truck drivers working in logistics, they don't have full rights and services. Let me speak a little bit more about the various categories or types of people who are coming in. So when we talk about migrants, it's the big picture, it's 1.6 million, but let me just go into it a little bit. So the first one to talk about is migrant farm workers, okay? Today, Canada is the world's 6th largest exporter of agri-food, 6th largest. And right now, we have seen during COVID-19, 1,600 migrant farm workers, the people who grow that food, who've fallen sick from COVID-19. 3 have passed away. In every one of these instances, what happened was that one person got sick in a farm, but because all of the workers live in these bunkhouses on top of each other, aren't allowed to leave the farm, aren't able to get basic health care, once one person got sick, everybody got sick. And for years prior and during COVID-19, migrant farm workers kept saying, look, we know that if one of us gets sick, all of us will fall sick. But if we speak up, we'll get fired because we live in employer-controlled. We are on employer work permits, which means you're indentured to the employer. The employer's name is literally on your work permit. You can't work anywhere else. You live in employer-provided homing. So not only are you out of a job, you're now homeless. You're homeless and you cannot leave. And you're forced, and the employer controls if you come back in the future. So you're homeless, you are kicked out of your work, you are forced out of the country, and you can't come back. So imagine when you're asking for your basic health and safety at your hospital or at your clinic, at your site, and if you speak up, the boss will have reprisals, right? The union has your back, but the boss will act against you. How imagine how that works when the boss has that much power, right? And so as a result, we have seen, employers get away with almost anything because workers don't have the power to walk away. They can't go on strike. They can't speak up because they don't have full and permanent immigration status, right? Another type of workers are migrant care workers. Most migrant care workers, and I'm gonna request to play this video in just a minute, so if you folks want to get ready, but just migrant care workers are women, largely racialized women from from Philippines, Indonesia, India, and then other Latin American countries, African countries, who come to Canada, who take care of children, sick, and the elderly. So they work in long-term care homes, but they also work in-home. And the vast majority of them are actually nurses who are trained as nurses back home, and their only ability to come to the country is through this program. So I'll show you a brief video that was just made a few weeks ago by domestic workers talking about their life and experience, and I'll speak to it further.
My employer forced me to stay home for almost 3 months. You cannot go anywhere, you cannot meet your friends. Many people come and go to the house and not even wearing a mask. I can't refuse, I can't complain because I'm being scared to lose my job. She will terminate me. I lost my job, and for being lost my job is also losing my family future.
I was working there 19 hours every single day. They only paid me $600 every month. My holiday was start 10 o'clock, and after when I came back home, and they still say, oh, you should work, we are going out, so you should take care of our kids. So yeah, so even the holiday was not holiday.
If you don't have like a good working environment, you tend to like stay with the family just because you have to stay employed.
Because we don't have a permanent residency, that's why our employers taking advantage and we are being abused.
I don't want to lose my job, of course, because I have my family in the Philippines. I'm only the one supporting them. You think of you might lose your income, you will not get paid, or you lose your job because you're ill. I can really straight telling them that I am really sick.
I know that if I get sick, no one can take care of me as well. I'm alone here in Canada.
I didn't know what to do because I was laid off. I didn't know whether I've been fired completely or not. Some of us care workers, we don't have like open work permit. We are stuck with same employer. You also have your family back home to support, so they depend on you.
My daughter is already 18 and 16, and it's really hard because like I miss most of their life already, and I want to provide them with with good life, the promise of Canada.
Because of the time difference, it's hard because sometimes they need you, but they cannot reach you because you are working and you cannot even hold your phone. Some employers didn't want you to have the phones with you. Family separation is devastating because it's a mental and physically and emotionally.
We deserve benefits as caregivers, and we work very hard to support Canadians' family, and we contribute to Canadian society and economy.
We need landed status upon arrival.
We need permanent residency so we can take our rights.
We care workers need paid sick days for our own health, for our safety, and for the well-being and safety of the family we were taking care of.
We need to be together. We need the family together. We need the status. Status for all, landed status now.
These are migrant care workers from many countries around the world speaking about their experience of, maybe you count on, but the first speaker speaks about working 16 hours a day, but being paid $600 a month. And that when she spoke out, she was actually left out in the rain, and she was sitting in the park for hours until she was able to find another place. People are talking about separation from their children, 5, 7, 8 years separated from their children. At the same time, what we've seen, particularly in COVID-19, is that care workers are working harder. Parents are home, employers who are their employers, the children are home because the schools are closed, but these women are working in those homes 16, 17 hours a day and not getting any more money. As a result of COVID-19, employers aren't letting them even leave the house, but they're stuck there. And so, again, they are not able to speak up or speak out because they live in employer-provided homes, and the employer actually controls their work permit. Their name of the employer is written on their work permit. And this creates these conditions. And, particularly for BCNU members, just want to invite you to think about that these are mostly nurses. These are, women who eventually become PSWs in some cases. These are people that need, and there is, and I urge you to read our report. It's called Behind Closed Doors. It was the last slide. And you can watch this video also on our website. In fact, I'll drop the link in the chat so that you can, read the report and watch this video with the sound this time on your own in the future, just to get a sense of what it is that we are, the work that's happening, and then get in touch with local organizations in BC that can, that are working on these issues. So I just dropped the link in the chat for everyone. Another group of people that are also international students are, just want to make sure that everyone's seeing the new slide. Yes, are migrant students. So, again, as I said, 500,000 people coming into the country on study permits. During the course of their study, they're not allowed to work more than 20 hours off campus. In general, students pay 4 times the fee, that's the Canadian average, than the domestic student. They pay all of the taxes but can't get full health care. And not just that, what has happened now is that when you graduate from school, you have to finish 12 to 24 months of high-waged work experience. That, as you can imagine, during COVID-19, where we have seen, unemployment went up to 15%, right? So for racialized people, it was at 17%. That there are so few jobs that people are not able to get these high-wage jobs. So they're coming to the country, studying for many years, also working. Often parents back home have put all their life savings into banks to send them here. They graduate, they can't find work, or they found a job, but they lost it in COVID-19. But their work permits aren't renewable. So if you can imagine, if your work permit is not renewable, that means you have to finish 12 months of work in a 12-month period. But if you lose a job for 3 months, you can't finish it. And so on December 31st, just a few short weeks from now, we expect approximately 20,000 people to become undocumented because the government is not renewing their work permits. And so right now there's a huge campaign. This is a photograph of an action taking place at the ministry at the immigration offices in downtown Toronto, calling on the federal government to just make the work permits renewable. I mean, imagine people just want to be able to fulfill the requirements. They need a bit more time. They're being punished for a pandemic. And you can learn more about these issues by going here. This is the petition that talks about the postgraduate work permit and what's taking place there. Another thing that we are seeing, so what happens when you come here as a migrant? You come here as a student or a farm worker or a domestic worker or a refugee. And as I said, for most people, there is no chance of getting permanent resident status. So at one point over their career, over their life here, they will have to make a difficult decision. Let go of friends and family and hopes and opportunities here and return to another country or try to start over another country, or stay in Canada and live without immigration status. Particularly during COVID-19, places like Trinidad, the borders are closed, you can't go back. Other places where the risk is so high, people continue to choose to stay. And when they stay here, then they become unable to actually take care of their families because they don't have, right now, during COVID-19, we have leaders who don't have any papers, who didn't get served, didn't have work, and people don't have access to even COVID-19 testing or treatment. Even in BC, a lot of you are in the healthcare sector. You don't have status. It's in some regions, it's been impossible to people to even get that, COVID testing. And as a result, people are falling sick and dying without even the resources to go to funerals. And we're seeing this, and again, I want to point out that this is a decision made by the federal government to create a system of temporary migration, people who are undocumented, to create this second tier category of a person, right? Like basically say, what's the difference between you and I and another undocumented person or a student? It's simply the stamp on their passport. It's the color of their work permit. And who's making that decision? Why, on the basis of that, can you not just get COVID testing? Why can't you get basic income? Why can't you be with your families? Why can't you be with your healthcare? And so that is the crisis that has been created to create this two-tier system. And what we have also seen during COVID-19 is not just that, as a result, so while the federal government has denied migrants CERB or CRB, has denied migrants healthcare, family unity, anything, they are spending tens of thousands, actually millions of dollars to round up people, detain them, and deport them, even during a public health pandemic. Just recently, there's a man, his name is Ibrahim Touri. For 7 years, he was in prison and they couldn't deport him. And so they let him out because they don't have the documents to deport him. But they just rearrested him, took him through a whole trial to deport him and try to detain him. When they don't have any, and then they found the new documents that were created, now it has become clear that the actual immigration officer faked it. Basically, he was able to get a birth certificate, get a passport. The birth certificate has since been found to be fake and has been removed. But because the passport already exists, they're trying to use that to deport people. This is what's happening in Canada by Canadian immigration. Federally paid, taxpayer paid people are doing this. Another person, is Mamadou Kanate. Mamadou was a long-term care health worker, Haitian refugee in Quebec, and he was picked up, detained, thrown into this prison in Laval. So while we are seeing, how is that? First, the government denies people rights and status, and it chooses to put money not into saving lives and livelihoods, but instead in detaining and deporting people. And I want to, reiterate, when bosses exercise this much control over 1 in 23 workers, the entire working class suffers. The corporations and politicians who are slashing wages, attacking labor, who are privatizing the health sector, are the same ones profiting from keeping migrants temporary and undocumented. Migrants are your co-workers, your members, your neighbors. And we need to have a united fight where labor stands alongside migrants and says an injury to one is an injury to all, to actually put that into practice. And that means to be, is to, and to reiterate, in BC, I invite you to go and meet with your allies who are working with migrant and undocumented people in your communities, to organize them the exact same way that you would organize a workplace, right? Get people together, have them identify their strategies, and allow and support them into achieving those strategies, not as charity, but as solidarity in one united struggle as the whole of the working class. Because, in the face of this crisis, migrants have an organized response. This is really important. I'm not just telling you stories about injustices and unfairness, but also that we migrants are organizing ourselves and working hard with our allies and our communities to make change happen. And I'll just give you some very simple examples. Right now during COVID-19, where the federal government essentially and the provincial governments did nothing for migrant documented people across the country, we stepped up. In Vancouver, for example, there's a group called Sanctuary Health that was distributing meals to 150 families. In a lot of farms, for example, there was no toilet paper and people weren't allowed to go to a store to get toilet paper. We heard other people just went and hoarded, but employers refused to let farm workers out because they were scared that they would get sick. But they didn't provide them any of the basic life essentials. So we were dropping off these packages of toilet paper, as you can see, and we said, don't let the government treat you like crap. You deserve paid sick days, open work permits, and permanent resident status. We're taking care of our people every which way we can. And at the same time, we are creating membership-based organization. We in the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change have started committees on farms and in factories with international students in universities and in communities with care workers in online, because it's one employer, one worker. And we are creating membership-based democratic organization of migrants that lead our work. And this is essential. We are building migrant power in the face of this global crisis. The rich are getting richer, but it is important for us as working class racialized people, as migrants, to self-organize, just as it's important for nurses to organize. In a public health crisis, unless we protect everyone, we cannot protect anyone.
I got my wife, her due date is on May 29th. Me and my wife, we don't have an SIN, a valid SIN number. And still we are asked to stay home. But the reality is that I cannot stay home. I don't have any kind of support. I need to hustle basically every day.
Ahora con el problema del COVID-19, no he podido ir a trabajar a Canadá. Y como nuestros ingresos económicos es con el trabajo que realizamos en Canadá, me encuentro en apuros económicos para solventar gastos en mi familia.
We cannot imagine ourselves on the street with our kids, having no way to provide them any food.
Los indocumentados, nosotros también somos humanos, nosotros también trabajamos y contribuimos fuertemente a la economía, a nuestro trabajo, nuestra mano de obra, que permite que siga funcionando esta máquina de la economía. Nosotras limpiamos, cuidamos las casas de otras mujeres, las que trabajamos como domésticas, cuidamos niños, ancianos, hacemos limpieza en hospitales, supermercados, trabajamos en los campos, en las fábricas. Nuestra mano de obra se encuentra en todos los sectores de la economía.
Myself and all my coworkers were all laid off. As a result of losing my job and also not qualifying for support because my SIN is expired. I have no idea how I'm going to be able to pay for rent and food.
I still need to eat and live. I believe we also should not be left behind. We contributed to Canada.
我希望得到公平的待遇，我也应该得到政府的紧急救济金。
All migrants in Canada must have income support.
It's really hard for me to believe that migrants like myself and all migrants cannot get support because of a formality like expired social insurance number.
I'm ready to work and ready to do what it takes to be a resident here. But I also include fighting for my rights as a worker, regardless of my status.
It is absolutely urgent that the government immediately extend income support to all workers who have been affected by COVID-19, regardless of their migration status.
Okay, let me just move on to the next slide. Yes, okay. So As you can see, these are our members. These are undocumented people, farm workers, international students, refugees. At the beginning of the pandemic, talking about the need for income support, and you can see we are in a process where we are actually organizing and speaking up, and that there is immense power in the work that we are doing. And even in what our key demand is, migrants, is, and what I invite all of you to support is something very simple, which is to say that in a fair society, we must have equal rights. And it is not possible to have equal rights when 1.6 million people, or 1 in 23 people, have temporary status, whether it's a study permit, a work permit, a refugee status. We just need everyone in the country to have full and permanent immigration status. This isn't about who gets to stay here and who gets to go. It's that all other rights, healthcare, education, family unity, are premised on whether you have this status or not. And when we have a single tier society, then the employers can't use us, the bosses can't make us fight each other. We are constantly in this crisis where we're being pitted against each other, where we are, the poorest in our society are supposed to fight each other at the bottom of the barrel, for basic rights and services, while those at the top laugh their way to the bank. In the last 9 months, $53 billion has been collected by Canada's few billionaires. The rich are getting richer while those of us are unable to even eat. And so a full and permanent immigration status is the central demand of the migrant justice movement, and it's one that we invite everyone in BCNU to support. We have draft resolutions you can pass. As I said, connect with local migrant organizations in your community, and understand that this is a position of solidarity that helps all of us. So I'm just going to show you a video to see, another video to show you how all our members are speaking about status for all as a central demand, as it must be implemented today. I'll speak a bit more, and then we can turn to question and answers. So you can just type your question, and then I'll be able to try and engage with them. So we'll have a bit of time, hopefully 20 minutes or so, to actually engage in a conversation.
We want full and permanent immigration status for all.
Permanent immigration status ensures that we migrants are able to protect ourselves. This is the time for the government of Canada to acknowledge this right and act to make this happen.
Cuando guardé silencio, no pasó nada. Tenemos que seguir luchando para que todos tengamos vidas dignas y seguras.
We invest everything we have to build our future here, but we have no protection or support if something goes wrong. We have no guarantee that our work will pay off and that we'll be allowed to stay.
Especially during this time of COVID, it's time for us to realize how interdependent we are.
In Canada, the rules are equal for everybody, but when we are trying for your employer because of your immigration status, the rules are not equal anymore.
Es difícil pasar por esta situación, pero voy a luchar hasta el final y no voy a parar hasta lograr un cambio. Y estoy aquí junto a todos ustedes exigiendo la residencia permanente para todos y todas y todos los migrantes. Respeto y igualdad para todos.
Status for all, time is now. Status for all, time is now. Status for all.
And this demand for status for all, this demand for a single tier society has now been supported by 350 plus organizations, almost every national union, almost every provincial and regional alliances of unions, federations of labor, but also immigration and settlement agencies, faith organizations, legal organizations, who are all coming together and saying we need to transform a society. We cannot be pitted against each other. We don't want to live in a society where 1 in 23 people are mistreated, abused, excluded from services on the basis of their immigration status. And I urge all of you to do the right thing and to support this call for status for all. And it's important, the photos in this, are missing, is that immigration status for all is is pragmatic. This is not a radical position. The shift to temporariness, even as I showed you, it's just been happening more and more so. But this is a recent aberration. It needs to be corrected. And it's possible. Right now, already the federal government has created a regularization program. Regularization program is where the government just gives permanent residency to groups of workers. It's given them to a group of construction workers and to some workers in healthcare who are refugees. And it is not an impossible step to give that to everyone, and to make sure everyone who enters the country in the future comes with full and permanent immigration status. And lastly, it's necessary. A fair society means equal rights, which requires status for all. It builds our solidarity, and it will help combat austerity. Because we know that during COVID-19, there has been so much government funds that have been put mostly into the hands of billionaires, but also into people's hands. And soon they're going to come after us and say, well, we spent all that money. Now you have to tighten your belt. They won't say that to the rich, but they will say it to us. So we need to be prepared to mount a working class resistance to further privatization and attack on our wages when they tell us to negotiate down. And the way to do that is to make sure that every worker in the country is able to fight together. And that means having the same immigration rights. So I will stop here. And I will invite people to ask questions in the chat. You can make comments. Unfortunately, we can't unmute you or hear from you, but it would be great to, hear from it. So somebody has asked, how are international students faring right now? I know someone who's stuck here because the school is closed and is unable to work, and the application through the government is stalled. So this is this is actually a number of major concerns. So what has happened during COVID-19 is that, Immigration Canada went down to 38% of processing, right? Which means that 62% of their staff weren't fully working. As a result, all work permit, study permit applications were stalled. Those that were supposed to take weeks have taken, upwards of 9 months. People have applied in March and still don't have access. Now imagine this, hundreds of thousands of people who have applied to renew their permits but aren't getting responses. Now, during the time that they don't have these valid permits, they don't have a valid social insurance number, their health cards are not allowed to be renewed, they can't work in some cases, they can't walk away. And it is a crisis. It is not a crisis of our making. It's a crisis that is a result of COVID-19 and the delays by the federal immigration government. And many, many migrant students are in crisis because of this. In many places, they're going to eat at food banks. But at the same time, as I showed you, the migrant students are organizing and campaigning and fighting together, calling for the government to make this rule. So that when they graduate, that they are able to actually get permanent residency status. So I'll just remind you of this slide where I had played this here, right? They're asking for postgraduate work permits to be renewed. And so there is organizing that is taking place, even though that we are in crisis. Okay. I hope that answers the question. The next question is, what is the difference between Canada and the USA on the care of migrant workers? I mean, this is a very common question. People have a lot of questions about, are we worse than the US? So let me just give you a couple of things. Right? So the first of all, there's a very great CBC video, compare US to Canadian immigration. So in the United States, over 60% of immigrants, so people with permanent residency, etc., are people who come from family reunification. That means it's families reunifying. In Canada, it's actually so-called economic migration, which means you have to be in high-waged work. So we're in this moment where we realize that it's actually the work that needs to be done in our society is often low-waged work, whether you are in retail or packaging or delivery. These are essential workers, low-waged, but it's only high-waged workers who get permanent residency. That's not the same in the United States. Also in the US, there are far fewer people on work permits or study permits. And that is because the vast number of people are either immigrants or undocumented because they're able to travel on foot into the US through the Mexico-US border which they're not able to do in Canada because the only border you would be crossing is the US and it's just fewer people. So Canada has a system of so-called temporary migration with a lot of controls and rules that tie people to their bosses. In a way, if many people are undocumented and they are in different states in the US, there are different laws that allow actually in some cases more labor mobility. So there's a different crisis, but if you talk about detention and deportation, it's worse in the US. So I think there are many differences, but the US should not be our example. You know, the US is 10 times the size of Canada. Geographically, it's in a different location. Its economy is different. You know, if it's worthwhile, we should think about ourselves in the context of places like Ireland, you know, with a similar population, etc., and similar set of codes. And you'll see in that case, Canada has, you know, many policies that are awful. So, and our role here is to really support the self-organizing of migrants. You know, there in the US, migrants are organizing and fighting, just like workers and nurses are. We must do the same where we are. It's hard to know if the person I'm talking to is like yes or no. So if you want to chat and be like, okay, I agree or not, it would be good to know what people are thinking. Okay. So next question. This is from Terry. Hi, Terry. Your first video featured internationally educated nurses who are working in other fields. We have a huge nursing shortage. The way to obtain license is very costly and lengthy. What can we do to help? Exactly. People are getting trained to be nurses abroad, but they're coming here working in low-wage work on tight work loads. For 24 months, you must, you know, as I said, you know, people being paid $600 a month while working 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's awful. And the first step is to ensure that those people have permanent immigration status, right? That is the very first step. That's the campaign that care workers are calling for. And then, yes, we need to change the accreditation system. So there's a lot of concerns and confusion and difficulty and for people to actually get their licenses. So it's a two-step solution. The first one is to support full and permanent immigration status for all, and second is to change the rules around accreditation. Okay, so I hope that answered your question, Terry. So the next question is, what can we do to push our organization to do the... Oh, hi, Terry's on my screen now. I hope you can all see her too. Okay. So what can we do to push our organization to do the best support migrant laborers right now to mitigate the immediate crisis? First and foremost, right, wherever you are in your local context, find an organization that is supporting migrants and work with them to identify what their needs are. As I said, there are 1.6 million people. There's a lot of people, and there is this shared thing that they don't all have permanent resident status, but there are these differences. So work with the ones closest to you. This is why when I started the meeting, I mentioned specifically the Migrant Rights Network, BC, which is all the self-organized migrant groups in British Columbia, and connect with them. The second is, as a union, to pass a resolution in support and full and permanent immigration status for all. We, hundreds of unions, both at the local level, council level, regional level, provincial level, Federation of Labor, etc., passing these resolutions. These are very crucial. And in it, urge the union, whenever they are meeting with the federal government, to actually support status for all. Right, so those are the two types of things. So if you go to our website, here we go. So this is the website, migrantrights.ca. This is the national website. We work with migrant farm workers, domestic workers. There's a separate website, but this is the one, and you can go, and there's a place where your organization can endorse status for all. If you want, we can send you draft resolutions to help you with that. So that's the direct support that's needed. And then in the local context, they may need money, they may need photocopying, they may want to speak to your member, so you'll have to figure that out. Jerry, would you like to continue with the questions now that you've joined us, or how do you want to do it? I want to make sure you've got, or should I keep going? What do you want?
I would love to. So we've got a question from, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We will go on with Sherry Rosedale. Do we offer the migrant workers the option to become Canadian citizens? And it's been very interesting for her, and I think all of us, to hear how it works in Canada. We do often hear a lot about the United States, but very little about how things are happening in Canada. So how do we manage migrant workers here if they want to become citizens?
So yes, I mean, that is the exact thing. So the idea is to have a single tier system. So everyone has basic citizenship rights, everyone in the country. So you come here with citizenship or permanent residency. Usually there's a two-step process: permanent residency, then citizenship. Because if you have a two-tier system, all of this exploitation and abuse happens. And as I showed you, it's not just us. Every migrant group in the country that is part of a coalition has signed on to these demands. 350 groups across the country, major labor unions, faith, legal organizations. There is a fundamental transformation of ideology that has happened during COVID-19, where people have finally realized that the only people who think it's a good idea to have 1 in 23 people, temporary or undocumented, are either the bosses, or institutions who make a lot of profit and money from having people in this second tier immigration status. So that's definitely the key ask. And then in addition, there are many local campaigns that are taking place that I urge you to find or get in touch with me, and I will help you support it. I think, Terry, Jackie's question, which was right before Sherry's, was not addressed. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So that one asks, can provincial governments offer permanent residency status to migrant workers, or does this only fall under federal jurisdiction? What can provincial governments do to influence full status for migrants?
So there are many, many things that provincial governments can do. So for example, in BC right now, there is healthcare that is under BC jurisdiction that is not available to many migrant and undocumented people, right? This includes COVID-19 testing and treatment. So that's something the provincial government can do. Similarly, education, people aren't able to get into schools or higher education. Similarly, social housing. So in BC, I understand, where the government was giving you rent subsidies if you during COVID-19 to some people, well, migrants couldn't get it. Similarly, social assistance. So all of the provincial services are largely excluding most or some groups of migrants. So there is, so we have this notion of a sanctuary province, a province where all services are available to all people, regardless of status. So that's something provincial governments can do. And in BC right now, specifically, there's an MSP for All campaign taking place to ensure healthcare is available. But then also, of course, the provincial government have a role to pressure the federal government to ensure status for migrants.
Thank you for your answer. We did have Susan posted that she wrote the first question and she found your answer quite helpful, so thank you.
Somebody had said, who should I contact in the federal government to talk about migrant rights? So it is in the ball, the ball is in Prime Minister Trudeau's court, On multiple times, he has directly been asked about this. There's a national movement for status for all that is taking place, and he's the person to call. So on our website, actually, if you go and you sign the petition, there's also a tool that connects you directly to the Prime Minister's office where you can make a call. But we also urge you to speak to your local members of parliament and tell them, how is this just? How is this fair? Do we want to live in a society where people are being treated as second-class citizens? And how, as a union and as nurses, specifically as people who are living in community, do you want a single-tier society?
I'm speaking for everybody, but I really enjoyed hearing from you today and learning from you. We've got your website up there, so if people want to connect with you, please send a message and ask for help. And perhaps we can talk to our Mosaic of Color caucus about some different ways that we could perhaps draft our own letter and send that out to people, because we do have a lot of advocacy work that we can collaborate with you on. Absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us at our very first virtual session, and we will see you hopefully in other sessions and down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.